Can you hear me now? Apparently there was an issue with our audio, so I'm going to restart the webinar from the beginning. Specifically with this slide, the webinar component. This is an overview of the webinar, and it will also track the AGF that we'll be reviewing. If you haven't already done so, please have a copy of the AGF in front of you. You can access it on the AGF website, or you can access it through this GoToWebinar. And feel free to pose questions throughout the webinar using the GoToWebinar feature. The major purpose for grant program and funding use. This begins on page 3 of the AGF. The Office of Grants and Research is the state administrating agency for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Section 405C grant funding received annually by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. On page 3, you'll see the purpose of the grant program, and it's described in the bullets below, the 5 bullets below. The most notable is the first, make measurable improvements to performance attributes, and these are accessibility, accuracy, completeness, integration, timeliness, or uniformity of state safety data systems, and these are citation adjudication, crash, driver, EMS injury surveillance, roadway, or vehicle, that will assist in identifying priorities for federal, state, and local traffic safety programs. The AGF is for up to $150,000 that can be awarded to one or more projects. Eligible applicants include units of state and local government, state higher educational institutions, or not-for-profit organizations with a public purpose in Massachusetts. Private sector organizations are not eligible to receive this funding. Funding made available through this AGF will be available to projects on or about March 25th, 2024 through September 30th of 2024. It is important to note at this point, and you'll see this in the AGF on page 4, that OGR anticipates releasing a second federal fiscal year 2024 405C funded AGF for $1 million in late winter 2024. It's expected this second AGF will be able to support projects with a completion date that extends as far as the end of federal fiscal year 2025. That's September 30th of 2025. Okay. At this point, I draw your attention on page 4 of the AGF to the key dates chart. We'll be talking about this later in the webinar, but for now, just be aware that the key dates for this AGF are on page 4. And I'll also note at this point that you can track changes to the AGF at that web page that's noted on the slide and is also noted in the AGF. Now for a little background and resources. This starts on page 4. First, there's the Office of Grants and Research, and specifically myself, Brooke Chipman, who will be available to assist applicants. The Office of Grants and Research is under the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. Our offices are now located in Braintree, and we'll be talking about it further, and the AGF notes it too, that there's the opportunity to pose questions through the AGF process and get answers. And this Q&A ultimately gets put up on the AGF webpage. Another important element of the AGF to point out to those seeking to apply would be the Traffic Records Coordinating Committee. You can see this starting on page 4. There's basically 2 traffic records coordinating committees in Massachusetts. It's really the executive level TRCC, as it's known, that's the most active and would be the most involved with the process to help OGR select projects for funding under this AGF. Another important resource is the traffic record self-assessment that OGR leads every 3 years, does this in conjunction with the executive level TRCC in particular. This is described on page 5 of the AGF. We had recently done a update to the self-assessment that resulted in subject matter expert input on questions and responses that then led to fresh recommendations, and there are a list of recommendations that have not been met in the AGF that those looking for project ideas and looking to have the most effective projects likely to get funded should consult. These are really the type of solutions that this grant program is looking to address and fund through the AGF. Another resource is the Massachusetts Strategic Plan for Traffic Records Improvement. This is on the traffic records page of the Office of Grants and Research, and you can see the website address there. This is, again, an important one for those seeking to have the most effective project possible and to secure funding. You can get a sense of how Massachusetts is doing meeting the unmet recommendations noted in the self-assessment through not only the self-assessment, but also reading the Massachusetts Strategic Plan for Traffic Records Improvement. Now we're going to move on to key AGF elements and requirements. This starts on page 5, and the first bullet and an important step coming up is a letter of intent. This is due on December 29th of this year, and the content of this letter of intent is explained at the start of page 6. Also on page 6, responses to this AGF must be submitted on the provided documents. There's an attachment A, application, and an attachment B, budget worksheets. And other documents are required for the submission by interested applicants. And the link that's there on that bullet on page 6 about these attachment A and attachment B will lead you to those documents and other documents. Now, projects that relate to the Massachusetts citation and crash systems have to align with the Motor Vehicle Automated Citation and Crash System, otherwise known as MACS, which is overseen by DCGIS, a state agency. This program has been very successful. The MACS system is utilized by the state police and the overwhelming majority of local police. And so the grant program would only support programs that aligned with the MACS if they involve citation and crash. Another important point highlighted on the slides and in the AGF is that applications for projects that are dependent upon a state or regional level public sector partner or partners must be supported with signed letters on partner letterhead with the application. Another important point that follows on page 6 of the AGF is that projects must work to meet at least one unmet recommendation from the Commonwealth's 2023 traffic record self-assessment that we spoke about earlier. Projects must also have a minimum of one measurable benchmark and performance measure related to a performance attribute of one of the 6 core traffic record systems. We'll be talking further about this on a slide to come. And there is a minimum 30% progress requirement for any applicant for funding under this AGF who has a current 405C funded project. Moving along on key AGF elements and requirements, you'll see in the AGF that there is a state or local match required for applicants who are not under the Executive Office of Public Safety. We'll have an additional slide on this as well. You'll also see in the AGF under page 7 information about the safety belt policy that must accompany an application if an entity is not under the executive branch safety belt policy. Allowable costs and budget related requirements, those are addressed on page 7 of the AGF in a chart that you'll see that runs to page 9. Important if you have any questions about these to utilize the question and answer opportunity that's part of the AGF process. Moving along in detail on page 9 related to allowable cost, there's an important section on equipment and software costs. And probably the most important thing to point out to new parties to the AGF process for 405C funding is that first sentence about no standalone purchases are permitted. Basically, this means you can't just buy a piece of equipment because you need it. Probably clear you need the equipment if you're asking for it, but the equipment has to be part of an entire program that you're going to undertake and would have to be necessary for project implementation. So there's a notable amount of language about that on page 9 that should be understood by any applicant. And we'll be talking about this a little bit more on another slide to come. There's unallowable costs that are detailed in the AGF. These include overtime or separately purchased warranty and service plans. And there is some unallowable equipment detailed, and these include, but are not limited to, radar detectors, LiDARs, portable radios, security cameras, speed radar signs or trailers, and variable message boards. Some of these items get covered by other grant programs here at OGR. So if you have a need in these areas, you should feel free to contact me and I can try to get you in touch with other grant program opportunities. But important to understand that these are unallowable equipment under this 405C grant program. As I said, we're going to talk a little bit more about match. Applicants not under the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security must show in their AGF responses how they would provide a minimum 20% state or locally funded hard or soft match based on the proposed total project cost. And there's an example there that I'll give everyone a chance to look at right now. We did receive a question related to equipment that we'll take a pause here to answer. And the question was, can you purchase a vehicle with this grant? And the answer is not likely. There could possibly be a way that one could show purchasing a vehicle would help address the needs of the 6 data systems. It's just extremely unlikely from anything that I would know based on my experience with the 405C funding and the Traffic Records Coordinating Committee. This is primarily a grant program that's looking to improve those data systems that I cited, the 6 data systems and the 6 performance attributes of those systems. And so a vehicle is really just extremely unlikely related to improving those data systems. At this point, we're going to go back to the match slide. And as you can see through the example and the total project cost formula, you need to, as part of your application, be showing how you're going to meet a minimum match requirement if you're an entity that's not under the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. So that would include like a local police department who was applying would have to show how it would meet this minimum 20% match requirement, either a hard match or a soft match. And if you were a state agency, but you were under the Department of Public, the Executive Office of Public Health, you would need to be showing a state match, either a hard or soft match. Now we're going to move on to the benchmark and performance measure slide. This is going to relate to page 6 that we had gone through earlier in the webinar. There is a requirement that projects have a minimum of one measurable benchmark and performance measure related to a performance attribute of one of the 6 core traffic record systems. And ideally, this benchmark and performance measure will be based on a methodology that's set out in a NHTSA document that's noted in the AGF called Model Performance Measures for State Traffic Record Systems. So there's a minimum requirement of one benchmark and performance measure for the project. Ideally, there'd be more. It's again an opportunity to demonstrate that you've actually moved the needle in improving one of the 6 core data systems in one of the 6 performance attribute manners. And again, it's very important that it's measurable so that you'll be able to actually show at the end of the project improvement. Ideally, it's going to meet the NHTSA standard that's outlined in that document. And there's an example there of a successful benchmark and performance measure from a previous project that I'll give everyone a chance to look at. That's the level and quality of benchmark and performance measure that we're looking for from applicants. As I said, we're going to spend a little bit more time with this slide on equipment and software. This relates to that earlier discussion we had about the allowable costs relating to equipment and software. In particular, on page 9 of the AGF. Again, you see that key sentence, no standalone purchases. NHTSA requires all equipment and software acquired with this grant funds to address a project need and be necessary for project implementation. Like with that request about a vehicle purchase, it's extremely important to inquire through the question and answer process about the suitability of a proposed equipment software purchase and to ensure that it would be allowable, to avoid spending a lot of time trying to acquire something that just wouldn't work. Sometimes there can be questions and people will proceed still, and then that's really something that OGR and the Traffic Records Coordinating Committee ultimately make the decision based on but for the most part, by using the question and answer process, you can get a sense of whether an equipment software purchase would be successful. The next bullet talks about the need for prior written NHTSA approval for such purchases of 5,000 or over. We secure that approval after an award is made through a request letter developed by OGR with the new subrecipient's assistance. Approval must be renewed for each federal fiscal year a project is conducted. So if your project runs over into a new federal fiscal year, we have to go back to NHTSA and get approval for that. And purchases must align with the Buy America Act. Now we are on page 10 of the AGF, and we are going to focus on the application review, award, and contracting steps. In the AGF, you'll see details about the AGF review committee that screens applications that come in, and how we prepare the executive level TRCC for its review of the qualified submissions. There is a project presentation step that will occur on or about January 19th. This is done online, and this is a really important step to help the AGF review committee better understand the project. And since the project presentations are public and members of the TRCC participate, or interested parties from the public, it's really a good chance for a lot of people involved to get a better sense of the project besides the applications that are presented. We've already referred earlier to the executive level TRCC meeting. This is going to take place on February 6th, 2024. And this is a public meeting done online where the projects are reviewed. Project advocates can explain any can address any additional questions that may come up from the TRCC or others. And then ultimately, following a process that's detailed in the AGF on page 10 and into 11, the Traffic Records Coordinating Committee decides which projects to support, how much funding they have, and then once these decisions are made, we review these with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to make sure that they're allowable and appropriate. And then there's Governor's Office and Executive Office of Public Safety and Security review. And then eventually we are able to make formal awards to projects. We then go through a series of contracting steps, and it's assumed at this point that we'll be able to start projects in late March, on or about March 25th is the date that we're putting out. And then projects can get started. And again, the end date for projects that receive funding through this AGF is September 30th of 2024. There's a little information in the AGF about monthly expenditure match and activity reporting requirements, and some other post-award matters are detailed starting on page 11, going through 11 to 12 and 13. Important to read all that fine print so that people understand the requirements that will be asked of them if they are selected for funding under this AGF. As I said, we were going to show you the key dates. Again, we talked about them on page 4 briefly, but here's a whole slide on them. Again, the one coming up quickly is the letter of intent deadline of December 29th. I'll point out one thing that we've been talking about, the Q&A submission deadline of January 11th. And then the most important deadline of all would of course be the e-application on January 16th of 2024. There's some other dates there that we've discussed so far, that being like the executive level TRCC meeting on February 6th, the project presentations on January 19th, and some other dates that are on this slide. I see that there's a question about will municipal police departments need to provide match funding? The answer to that question is yes. So any entity that's applying for funding under this AGF that is not under the Executive Office of Public Safety, so it would be state agencies under the Executive Office of Public Safety, needs to provide a match. And the match is detailed in the AGF, and we talked about it on that one slide a few slides back. I'll just go back to that quickly. So again, applicants not under EOPS must show in their AGF responses how they would provide a minimum 20% state or local funded hard and or soft match based on the proposed total project cost. And we have the example there and the formula that you would follow. So at this point, we're going to start to wrap up. If anyone wants to pose any further questions, now is a good time. You should definitely refer to the Federal Fiscal Year 2024 AGF for complete details of program requirements, including the process for posing questions after the webinar. And remember, the deadline for that posing questions is 4 p.m. January 11th. And so we'll hang on for a little bit to see if anyone has any questions as we go along here in the final minutes of our webinar. Well, thank you. We'll have a recording of the webinar on our OGR web page for this AGF. We'll include these slides as well. We're going to be doing, as we go along, doing question and answers, a Q&A document that'll also be available on the AGF page. That's a great source of information for all applicants. So again, we'll answer questions as they come in, but periodically we'll be updating the AGF web page with that document to allow all applicants to see questions posed and answers provided. The questions posed will not be attributed to the specific party. They'll be kept anonymous in that way, but the answers that OGR provides to each inquiry will be available. So at this point, we'll wrap up our webinar. Thank you for participating.